Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am very privileged to be among you and to be given the opportunity to say something and share something with you. Let me first say great thanks to the Dean, James Skip, for providing me with this opportunity, and to Dale Dawson for bridging that relationship. I am going to talk on a topic that is called Rwanda, Demystifying Justice and Facing Up to the Biggest Judicial Challenge in Modern Legal History. We believe that what happened in Rwanda was historic in a negative sense, but that the things that have been done since that time to provide some justice of some kind to the victims and the perpetrators has largely been close to a miracle, something people would not have been able to think about 18 years back. Let me just give you the context. I'd like you to close your eyes, take your time in time and space and go into 1994 and imagine a country of about 8 million in which about 1 million people had just been killed. And everywhere you went, in the rivers, on the streets, in the shrubs, in the rivers, were dead bodies, decomposing everywhere. A country of 8 million in which about 1 million, that's about 10%, if my mathematics is right, of the population were decomposing bodies everywhere. A country of stench and rot. A country where there was no hope for the next day. A country where most of the population had fled into neighboring countries, into Congo, into Burundi, into Uganda, into Tanzania. The streets were empty. The dogs and vultures and other birds of the prey were feasting on human corpses of the Rwandan people, and the whole world had retreated. When that orgy of killing started, the UN peacekeepers pulled out, the international community ran out, and let a gang of mad people set on innocent people, killing them in the most brutal manner unknown to our times. So the whole world ran away, and the Rwandans were left to themselves to sort themselves out. And that was the situation in 1994. So if you can imagine that period, what was going on at the time, there were too many challenges then. So no population, dead bodies everywhere, and there had been massive arrests across the country of people suspected of having taken part in genocide. And so, at the moment, there were too many competing views. What do you do? Where do you start? There's no cash economy, or the banks have been emptied, or the infrastructure is broken down, or the people have run out of the country, and you just have young men and women brandishing their AK-47, their rifles around the city, and there's nothing except trauma, massive trauma on large scale. During the genocide, there had been massive rapes of young girls and women everywhere. And so you had psychological trauma on the part of the victims, you had psychological trauma on the survivors of genocide, you had no cash economy, you had no government, you had a hopeless situation in the country. That's the image, that's where we start in 1994. So I can't deal with all the challenges that there were, including setting up a functioning government, establishing some form of order, establish some form of responsibility for the people to be governed. Those were challenges. That I can't go through because that will take us another 2 or 3 days to be able to deal with some of those challenges and how they were dealt with. So I'll deal with just a small aspect of that jigsaw of problems that the country faced, namely dealing with justice immediately after genocide. So you have arrested so many people, so many across the country, maybe 250,000 have been arrested as the soldiers went by, and the whole country had become a prison. Every conceivable place was a prison. Administrative units, police stations, where there was no space, they had put up holding camps and tents to house detainees. But what do you do with people who are accused of genocide in such a large numbers? Huge numbers, because the killers had planned that if everybody is involved in the killing, then you cannot be able to try them, to subject them to justice, because there are too many, they'll overwhelm you. And this is exactly what was happening. So there was a cry for justice, 4 competing voices crying for justice. On the part of genocide survivors, they wanted justice. Everybody was crying for justice among the survivors of genocide. So how do you provide justice to these people? But on the other hand, the detainees, the suspects, were crying for justice. Our international friends were crying for justice, saying, judge them. You cannot hold somebody on trial, in detention without trial. Subject them to justice. And then there was a government that was just formed and had to do something about it, had to establish its authority over the territory, and had to assure the citizen that the culture of impunity, where you could do crime with impunity, was over. And so those were the 4 competing priorities in the justice delivery system. But how do you provide justice to the victims of genocide who are crying everywhere? And I want to tell you, most of them, I believe at the time, wanted some form of revenge. So if they had their way, they would just have gone on rampage and they could have killed. That was an option available to the government. Let the people go and tussle it out, or let the government do what the killers did. But that was the wrong option. So the decision that the government took was to subject the mass killers to accountability, to justice. But there were no judges in the country. There were no prosecutors in the country. There were no police investigators in the country. So how are you going to judge 200,000, 300,000 people without judges, without prosecutors, without investigators? How do you reconcile this challenge? Because that's why we call it the biggest challenge in modern legal history. The country has no judges, has no prosecutors. The few that had existed before the war had either been killed or had fled the country. You had just young men and women and a few people in the country. You had no legal system in place, nothing at all. So how are you going to provide justice? Because that was the challenge. And everybody was saying there must be justice. But nobody was providing the key, the formula how to go about it, but everybody expected justice to be rendered. And so we tried. First, as you know, to train somebody to become a judge or a prosecutor will take you, in my country, maybe 20 years. In your country, I think maybe 24, 25, if you're going to go to the law school and come out. So is the country going to sit for 25 years waiting to create judges and prosecutors and then come and judge the perpetrators and then come and give justice to the victims? This was a challenge. What do? You have suspects, you have victims, but you have no infrastructure to deliver justice. And so the country tried, using its imaginative, innovative means, they sent out invitations across the country. Anybody who was young, man and woman, who had no job, should apply for a job to be a judge or a prosecutor or investigator. So after very many meetings, international conferences of all sorts, Some made in Nordic countries, others made in the US, and others made all over the world. Some form of solution had to be found. And so we trained the people for 6 months, made them judges of the court of the first instance, of the appeal court. We trained the people for 3 to 4 months and made them national prosecutors. We trained the people for 2 to 3 months and made them investigators. So we put in place a team maybe close to several thousand people. So they started the initial identification of the suspects. So we created what we call the committee de triage. These are screening committees. Identify the people. Who are you? Your name, your father, what you did, where you did it. Just initial creation of a dossier per person. So by the time they ran through identifying each of the suspects, it was already 1 year gone. And the cry for justice was even becoming louder. So the trials hadn't started at all. They were just on identification process. In the second year, some form of putting together evidence, interviewing witnesses started. And so this process went on for some time. And I think by 1996, December 23rd, the first case on genocide was decided in eastern Rwanda. The first conviction on genocide was made on 23rd December, just 2 days before Christmas, 1996. And so that was a signal that at least the trials and the culture of impunity had been dealt with decisively. At least the starting point, nobody would escape justice merely because of the large numbers. So efforts continued after that. 3 years down the road, about 1999, it was clear that you would never get anywhere because in the intervening period, there had been so many releases of children who had been sent to rehabilitation centers, of women that were considered to be pregnant or vulnerable. They were released on a temporary basis, of old men that or very sick and elderly people were released. That decongested the prisoners a bit, but that was just a drop in the ocean. It did not make major impact on the numbers of the detainees. So what do you do with these so many detainees? What do you do with so many people who are crying for justice, the victims? So 3 years down the road, we had tried about maybe 300 cases only. But you're talking of 200,000, you have only tried 300 people. So what are you going to do? Again, conferences, and everybody was saying there must be justice. Some people are even saying, no, justice is delayed, is justice denied. Fine, but what do you do? Give us the formula, and nobody had the formula. And everybody wanted justice. And so Rwanda was again caught up in the midst of a big, big challenge. So this hasn't worked. Because why didn't it work? Because we introduced so many people, trained judges for 6 months or for whatever, but we maintained the Western type of justice, where you have to have the robes, the people sitting, the lawyers dancing and making speeches, the judges hammering, the whole, this ceremony in the court, you know, some of the theatrics in court, they had to be, that's what they call justice. In other words, if you don't have a judge here, a prosecutor here, a defense attorney here, then it cannot be justice. So we got stuck into that. And for 3 years, we were able to try about 300 people. But you're talking about 200,000 detainees. You're talking about the survivors of genocide who don't have the luxury of living 100 years or 200 years or 300 years to see justice. So it would be justice for the dead. So the survivors would be dead. The perpetrators would be dead. So whom would you be giving justice? So again, people had to stretch their mind and think. So afterwards, it became clear we had only to find some initiative. And so we decided through so many consultations between 1999 and thereafter up to about 2002, said there's something called Gacaca. Gacaca is a traditional Rwandan judicial system that existed before the colonial times. Gacaca is a type of grass that creeps, soft, on the thatch. So people used to sit in the grass. And the sage, the wise men of the time, would sit and decide the fate of their fellow men or women in a community-based, talk public, be open, and judge. So, but this was in the culture and tradition which everybody understood. So people thought, why can't we adapt this? Because that was not written, but every time there was a feud between clans, between man and woman, between people whose animals spread into other people's crops, where they had fights, where all sorts of conflicts were always resolved through Gacaca. And so people said, why can't we adopt that to this challenge? Get the people to sit together, get everybody to talk what they saw, what they had, let the people elect among themselves the people they trust most. They call them Inyanga Mugayo, in my language means the flawless, the blameless, people of integrity, irrespective of their gender, irrespective of their religion, irrespective of their so-called tribe or whatever. If they are people of integrity, let's elect them. They sit, and then with the population will come and provide evidence for or against. And then communally we shall decide that this person is guilty or innocent. So this Gacaca was therefore introduced after about 4 years of consultation, and was deemed to be the only solution that could work on this magnitude of the problem. And so there was initially a pilot project between, I think, 2000 and 2002. Then in 2002, there was a national launch of the Gacaca courts across the nation. That was on 18th June 2002, when it was launched as an alternative way of dealing with this crisis. And so people were elected nationally from each village. People were elected on the basis of their integrity. And for the first time in the history of any judicial process, the victims of genocide and the perpetrators of genocide, their relatives, because the perpetrators were in prison, but the families of the victims and the families of the perpetrator sat together and constituted a court. And the population constituted the defense and the prosecution. And the public, like we are sitting here, you come and say, look, I am so and so, I saw ABCD, so and so did ABCD. Then they say, is what he's saying, is that correct? Then you will say yes, or you say it's no. So those who say yes, then you give the details of what you did, and you also say others with whom you did it. That made the work very easy. And in the law setting up Gacaca, if anybody volunteered, if anybody was cooperating with justice to tell the truth, their sentence was made half, and the other half was to do community work or to go home. And so many people contribute. You call it plea bargain in the US system and other countries. So if you agree, you confess, you tell the truth, then your sentence is drastically reduced. So in the process, very many people came forward and provided very useful information on where people were buried, on how they were killed, etc. And in the prison, thanks to largely the churches, so many people, I think their conscience became too heavy for them to keep the guilt. So there was a wave of, they called it salvation. People got saved in the prisons. And I think their conscience kept tormenting them. They came out to talk the truth. On Sundays, after some preachings and what, people would come out crying and say, look, I can't keep this guilt anymore. This is what I did with so and so, we did A, B, C, D. So the role of the churches, the role of men and women of God in getting the people's heart to be pricked, I think the active role in the Rwandan justice of the Holy Spirit in a way, descending upon prisons and touching the hearts of these people, prayed a bigger justice than even the justice that men and women were able to provide. Because without the active participation of the perpetrators of genocide, the truth would never have been known, because they had all the information themselves. They are the ones that killed during the night, they are the ones that killed during the day, they are the ones that manned the roadblocks. The survivors were hiding and running here and there, so they didn't have all the facts. So most of the facts, therefore, were presented by the perpetrators themselves. So what has happened then down the road, 10 years later, the Gacaca courts have judged about 2 million cases. It's 1,980,000 something, close to 2 million cases have been judged by these people in 10 years. That's a miracle. Nearly 2 million cases have been judged by these ordinary folks who have never gone to school, who don't have law degrees, just peasants. They have done it. And how do we compare with the rest of the system? The Rwandan courts, the traditional ones that kept on using the Western type of justice, they have judged about 15,000 cases. So compare 15,000 cases in ordinary courts and 2 million in the Gacaca courts. Compare that with 60 cases in Arusha, the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, with billions of dollars spent, just 60 cases. Compared to Europe, I think in Norway, in Sweden, in the UK, in Switzerland, in Belgium, in the Netherlands, I think they have judged 1 or 2 cases each related to genocide or crimes against humanity for massive sums of money. One case would take maybe 4 or 5 years in all those countries. So if you compare what the peasants, ordinary Rwandans have been able to do, compare with what foreign jurisdictions have done in Europe. I think in the US there was one case that has been running, and I think it is not even ending. Recently there was they called it a mistrial or something. It is going to resume. That's one case. In Canada, one genocide suspect to be transferred to Rwanda took something like 10 years, one person. So this is the kind of justice that Rwandans could not be able to live with. So they have been able to put their act together, use the Gacaca system to judge themselves. So what has been the impact, therefore, of so many of these cases that have been judged? The most interesting features of Gacaca is what? One, that these courts acquitted, found innocent, about 30% of all the trials. That's the highest number you can have in any judicial system. If you acquit 30% of the suspects, then you are a serious court. In Europe, we haven't had any acquittals except one. In Arusha, I think the percentage is about 2%. In the ordinary courts in Rwanda, I think it's about 8% acquittals. But the Gacaca courts, because they used direct evidence, I saw, I heard. So they were able to acquit easily people that were not being accused correctly. Two, of the 2 million cases they have judged, plus the 15,000 that were judged by ordinary courts in Rwanda, only 37,000 suspects of genocide are in prison. 37,000 people out of 2 million and above of trials are in prison. So where are the rest? They have been reintegrated into the community. They have been in what they call TIGE, Travaux d'intérêt général, that is community work. They have gone to community work instead of prison because it's an alternative sentence. Two, some have finished their sentence because of the pre-bargain arrangement. They got short sentences of 5 years or 4. They have since finished. Others just ran through the system. Others were acquitted. So you have less than 0.something% of all the caseload reintegrated into the community. In our system, people live together. There is no village for survivors, no village for perpetrators. They all live together in lines. So there are no revenge killings. Because Gacaca preached reconciliation, Gacaca preached forgiveness, Gacaca preached tolerance, Gacaca pleaded reestablishment of the national fabric, respect for each other, forgiveness, reconciliation as the basis for our country today and our country tomorrow. And the people have bought in. And so you have now people living side by side, no killings, no revenge killings, and They share the community work on Saturday, end of the month. They do program activities together. They help each other to build for survivors of genocide, vulnerable people. So the people are living together peacefully. It's not a perfect relationship. Definitely would never be. But there are no, you can't find many countries where somebody who has killed 10 of your family members is still living with you. You can't find many communities where people who have lost their children, their wives, their husbands, are still going to the same field with you and share with you the day-to-day livelihood. There are not many countries where you go to prison and you find these fellows who have been condemned, they're in prison, they are dancing, they are weaving, they are out in the open, they are not running away. But the Rwandans have had it the hard way. They have lived through a hellish experience. They have come to recognize that they have reached the worst, the lowest that human beings can reach, and they have said, no, enough is enough, and so they have decided to reconstruct their country together. So we have a lot of hope where there was hopelessness. We have a lot of light ahead. We have a country that is stable, that is picking the pieces, and that we believe that will push us into the next century. We are preaching the story of being Rwandans rather than being Hutu and Tutsi and Twa. We are preaching the gospel of reconciliation. We are preaching the gospel of national unity. We are preaching the history of together we rise against each other or sink. So that's where we are today. And we think that we will make it. I just want to conclude by saying that it's not perfect. There have been criticisms here and there, the Gacaca process. But we have been able to demystify justice. That justice is not about form, but substance. Justice is about reconciliation. It's about the truth. It's about fairness. It's about transparency. It's not about the lawyers. It's not about how smart you have talked. It's about the essence of justice, about fairness. It's about transparency. It's about the truth. It's about substance rather than the form. And so we think, or we believe that the Gacaca has provided the substantive justice rather than the form where you have to have a lawyer say this and that whatever they have done it in good faith and as honestly as they can. Of course, there will be shortcomings in any system. People will say it does not match international standards because there were no lawyers, no defense attorneys. Sure. How else did you want it to be done? But has justice been denied? No. Did the person get a chance to be heard? Yes. Was everything made possible for the person to defend themselves, provide witnesses? Yes. Is the verdict on the basis of the truth? Yes. Once that is there, then it is justice in substance rather than justice in form. Are the people reconciled after that? Yes. We have women clubs with very interesting names which share the survivors of genocide, the families of perpetrators who are in prison. They create women's clubs to support each other. Because although one lost a husband, the other one, the husband, is in a prison. So they go together to comfort each other. We have situations where in the villages, people pick a day to go and visit the perpetrators, go and visit the family of the survivor to say, look, we are sorry what happened. Can we take another chapter? So these are experimental things that the country is trying to do, and look upon people like you to be supportive of these programs. We look upon our friends, both in the region and beyond, to understand that we have a challenge. So we are grateful that we have been able to foster a relationship between particularly Little Rock community and the community in Rwanda. There is a lot that is going on through the activities of Bridge to Rwanda and other people that have been very supportive of Rwanda. I want to thank you so much, but before I conclude, let me say that in Rwanda, some of the things that are making these things possible, there is one called the Spirit of Volunteerism. You see, after the war, during that period, all these guys you have heard in Gacaca, there are about 500,000, 500,000 people. They were not getting any salary, no pay. It's voluntary work. So the spirit of voluntarism to serve your nation and your people has been a cornerstone of some of the successes. So voluntarism and innovation. Immediately after the war, some of us, all of us who were civil servants at the time, were not getting salary from 1994 up to 1996. Everybody was working free. There was no pay, there was no salary. But on Friday, they would give you some half a liter of cooking oil. They would give you maybe a kilo of salt, some yellow corn flour, or maize flour. They would give you some food, they called it food for work, provided by the World Food Organization. That's what we would earn as a salary for nearly 2.5 years. And some peas, you know peas? They are called peas, yeah? These small round things. You would cook them the whole day from morning to evening. In the evening, you hit it down, it still bounces in the air. That was our salary for about 2 years. And so, but people worked on until we were able to establish a cash economy. So I want to tell people here doing a public service in this school, the students, that public service is about service, and that they should take that spirit that they are servants of the people, that they should be able to feel when you come to a college, a school like this one, that what you get out of from here is the spirit of service. It's not the spirit of going to lord it over the people, but to go and serve the people. So in Rwanda, we're trying to do that, to preach it. It's a hard lesson for people to take down, but the spirit of service, I think, should be enshrined in the training here, that people who are trained as civil servants, as public servants, they should understand their mission as servants and therefore go out to serve. That way, I think we all have a stake in the future and will be successful. I want to thank you very much for your kind attention. I've been talking too much. I want to give you an opportunity to ask questions, to make comments, to deal with me however you want. I want to thank you so much. All right.
Thank you for those remarks. We do have time for some questions. If you raise your hand, we'll get a microphone to you. Professor Bowman.
Hi, I'm Professor Bowman. I teach here at the Clayton School, and I actually did dissertation research in Rwanda. So it's such an honor to have you here with us, and we're so grateful you've come. I wanted to ask you, given that Rwanda's parliament has the highest number of women of any parliament in the world right now, how has that changed the complexion of justice in your country?
You want to go one at a time, or do you want to get all of them?
I mean, several questions would be better.
Great. He's going to write down some of these, and then we'll ask them.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister, for coming. My name is Daniel Whalen. I teach at Henry College. I'm a scholar of human rights, teach international relations. I have two questions. First, could you tell us how far along the Gacaca process is? How long do you imagine, is it done, or will it continue on in the future? And the second is, it's a question about nuance. The human rights scholarly community is very divided about the Gacaca system. And you know, you've mentioned it, and the person who introduced you mentioned it, that it's not perfect, but we don't hear much about the not perfect part. So I was wondering if you could speak to some of the human rights community that is very critical of the system. Thank you.
Peggy?
Thank you for bringing us this narrative of what happened. From the perspective of the international community and the idea of never again, and trying to stop such events as they get started, as people told their stories, the perpetrators of what they did they explain why they did what they did? so that we might begin to understand what would have been the words or what would have been the actions that outsiders might have been able to take that would have turned off the killing.
You want to do those three and then we'll come back if we have any more? Oh, we have one more.
That one.
Okay. Here comes to your right.
I was just curious as to who the former bankers were and who your current bankers are and what are they investing in? And is that a success?
Come again?
Bankers? The bankers? You said the country was bankrupt as a result of...
The banker, money, were
Bank.
banks.
Oh, thanks.
I talked about banks. Huh? That's English made in Rwanda. I thought banks were empty.
Sorry. Who were the former investors and who are the current ones? And is that a success story? Am I making... I don't know. Is it sensitive?
I guess I have an idea. I'll try. Okay.
Right here.
The experience of working out justice is something that there are factors unique to Rwanda to make it happen. Would it be a thing that could have happened in other places in Africa, or was there something particularly resident in Rwandan culture to make this a possibility?
In the back.
I may have missed this, but one question was how long you've been in the position of Department of Justice as the head of the Ministry of Justice, and what specifically is your role in this process and has been your role, just a personal aspect of that?
Why don't I start with the easiest one? The last one. For me, is the easiest. As a Minister for Justice and Attorney General, I'm just responsible for policy in this. I do not execute. There are other organs that are responsible. In terms of relations, we have an independent judiciary, separate with its own budget, its own administration. We also have a separate prosecution service, separate with their own administrative and financial autonomy. In respect of the Gacaca courts, we had what we call the National Committee that did the administrative function, but the work was being done by the people at the local level. So my role really has been that of policy follow-up, policy implementation. At a personal level, I think I did have some role in the setup of the Gacaca. As I said earlier, the debates took a long time. From the 1994 to when they were nationally launched in 2002, it was 7 years down the road. In the intervening period, I was here and there. I worked as the Prosecutor General. Later on, I worked as the Vice Chairman or Vice President of the Supreme Court. That is Deputy Chief Justice in charge of administration. I also worked as the Chairman of the Law Reform Commission, as the Presiding Judge of the High Court, and in 2006, that's when I was named the Minister. So I've been through the system. And before then, I had worked outside Rwanda as a prosecutor. I'd also had 7 years working for UNICEF and 4 years with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. So I've been around what you call a master, something of all trade, but a master of none. You know, a jack of all trade, everywhere doing nothing, but somehow doing something. So in this process, I did have some reasonable contribution, but this was part of a national debate. There were meetings that took place in the president's office between 1994, almost every weekend, where the country was chatting the way forward. What do we do with this? What do we do with this? Different people made contributions. So Gacaca came as a result of these national consultative meetings that took place over a long period. So I happen to have had some reasonable role in the setup, but it was collective work by so many people. I think I will go to the next, going upwards on just whether this system can work elsewhere. I think it is adaptable to other places. It could easily be adaptable, but it cannot be a wholesome take to any other community, because you must have the other factors in the jigsaw fitting together. You must probably have the same kind of belief in the capacity of the people to sit together and decide. You must have a belief in the integrity of the people that are going to have it. You must have a capacity to make these fellows feel that they have a common destiny, although they come from the perpetrator family and the victim family. At the end of the day, they all benefit from the decision they have jointly made. Because see, in the case of Rwanda, even if you are to take the extreme view on tribal divide, assume you had what they call the Hutu and Tutsi. It's a myth, but we are not dealing with that today. Assume we are to deal with the myth of the Hutu Tutsi, and we call the Hutu the majority and the Tutsi the minority in the proportion that people have put out. Still you would have, in any geographical cut point, still the Hutus would be the majority. If you took any geographical limitation, a village, a cell, an administrative unit, you would still have them as the majority. So what would that be? That would mean that the perpetrators would actually be judging themselves. That's the message. But people went beyond that kind of divide. And people sat together, whether they were victims or perpetrators, to bring out the truth, to help in the healing process, because the country had really done itself wrong. And the people were ashamed about what they did to each other. Because in the culture of the people, they're not generally violent people. Those who have visited Rwanda, these are a peaceful group of people. How this happened, I think that's in the next question somebody asked. So you cannot, in a way, transplant it and put in another place wholesome, but you can adapt it to any situation. I know so many people are doing research on it, including people from leading universities in the US, Harvard, and everywhere. They're doing a lot of research on this. There are so many publications that have come from so many academicians. By and large, people believe it's a very good system that can be tried elsewhere, but you have to adopt it to the local setup. And then there was a question of the banks. See, I was talking about the economy broken down, no money at all, and there was nothing to pay people at the time. And so people volunteered until people were able to establish banks, and some cash economy was able to be established. That was several years after genocide, maybe 2.5 years down the road. The banks, the economic infrastructure was put in place, and so they started paying the initial salary in terms of cash. I think around 1996 they started paying. But otherwise the money had been looted. There was nothing like money in the country, and people just traded in exchange of goods. You give me a kilo of beans, I give you a kilo of sorghum. You give me a kilo of potatoes, I give you a kilo of oats, something like that. That's how it worked. And then civil servants worked voluntarily without pay until the banks were established. I don't know whether that is what you had in mind about. There was no economy to support the civil service. That's what it means. And so people had to start from zero. And the other question was, did the people really explain why they did this? How could people do something like that? it's very difficult to explain. As a prosecutor, I had a chance to talk to some of these people. As a prosecutor at the time, I had a chance to talk to women that had killed children. You know, you can't imagine a mother killing a mother. You can't imagine a wife betraying a husband. But the human being, at the base of the human nature, there is a beast. There's an animal in all of us. That is why animals are given zoos, you know, to be kept in zoos so they don't kill each other. Human beings are usually given the laws are the zoo. So you keep the human beings in the zoo of laws, saying you do this, they kill you, do this, they kill you, you do this. So the human beings are, once you let them go, you'll never know where they will stop. That's how it happened in Europe with the Nazis. That's how it happened in Bosnia-Herzegovina. That's how it happened, I think it was in Darfur in Sudan. If you let the people go, you have them have bad leaders, they'll kill each other, even tomorrow. So if you tell people go and kill, and if you kill, you'll get a car. If you kill, you'll get a house. If these people have been exploiting you all the years, kill them, create imaginary enemies, it will happen any day, anywhere. So thank God it's not happening quite often in the world, but the potential for it to happen anywhere is there. People can't explain why they did it. Most of the people we talk, they break down and cry. If you attend some of the Gacaca proceedings, people would break down and say, oh, forgive me. They would just cry like babies. I don't know why I did this. This person was my friend. I loved them. I did this, but I killed them. Because I was told to kill them because of ABCD. Others were raping women because they thought these women were superior to them, some form of inferiority complex. And actually today is one of the biggest challenges the country is having, because in some of those rapes, the women are still living with AIDS, some of them. Others, they are children who have been born, but they don't know the father, they don't know, and the mother can't tell them that they are products of massive rape, because the mother doesn't know the father. If she was raped by 2, 4, 5, 6, 10 people, she will not know which of the gang rapers is the father of the child. So we have children in thousands and thousands in the country whose father you cannot identify. And this for us is a form of time bomb, because these are traumatized people. That's every year when you have this national commemoration, you get people breaking down. In April, it's a month of crisis in the country. The schools, the homes are in a terrible crisis in the months of April to June, every year in the country. When people go through this sad history, when children all of a sudden recognize they don't know their father, when women are ashamed of having a child whose father they don't know, they have no choice but to love the child, but they don't love the child because the child is a constant reminder of the humiliation they went through. So that's why I said it's not the best of setups in the country. The trauma is still there. The risks for breakdown are still there. The anguish, the acute suffering is still there. And it will be there for a long, long time. Maybe it will die with some of us that are grown, and maybe the young people that didn't actually witness it direct will survive. But even then, it will linger on for a long time in our society. So people don't know why they did it. I think it was just an analogy of that kind in the preaching hate and what people can do anything. The animal nature in us always overtakes us when there is something we think we can gain in a short run. So I think that's what happened in Rwanda. So there was a question about is Gacaca over, and what do we talk about human rights organizations that have criticized it? Yes, true, Gacaca was never meant to be a permanent feature in the Rwandan judicial system. It was put there to deal with a specific crisis and close once that crisis is over. So Gacaca courts are closing officially and formally on June 18th this year. We're just about a month away from the closure. This will be a national function. 18th June, they'll be closed because they have done all their work. They have finished. Give them marks, give them points of achievements. They have finished their work. They are going to close officially because that was meant to be to sort out a certain problem and then close. But the idea of Gacaca is going to be maintained through other laws, not for genocide cases, but we have what we call mediation committees that have been put in our constitution to sort out issues at the community level in a program called Access to Justice for All. So that justice is not meant people who can hire lawyers only, people who have the money. So we have what we call access to justice bureaus at the community level, les maisons d'accès à la justice, that's what in French. Huh? So in every community, we have this mediation committee elected to judge cases of civil or criminal nature, but of a limited kind. So what you would call like small claims courts and things like that. So they will be sorting out most of the issues at the community level so that they don't develop into bigger conflicts. So we have those across the country. So the idea of Gacaca, reconciliation, mediation will still continue, but not to judge genocide cases. That is closing formally on 18th. But the criticism that some human rights organizations have been raising are contradictory in nature. You see, because it is easier to talk than to do. Because anybody can say this and this is wrong, but if you ask them what's right, they will still not give you any answer. And so we listen to these complaints. For them, the justice in their sense is just as I told you about. It's about form, not about substance. Because for them, for a thing to be justice, it is that which is planted in their head. There must be a judge here, or judges. There must be a defense attorney here. There must be a prosecutor. There must be a calling witness. Unless it's done like that, then for them it's not justice. So it's justice about form, not substance. And they don't give you an alternative. They talk and say, you must try them. Say, how? We have no judges. Yes, but try them. How? So it is easier to run an NGO, a human rights organization, than to run a country, than to run an organization of people. People that will need economy, people that will need bread, people that will need to be stabilized, people that will need a home, people that will need health care, people that will need all sorts of things. And all these have to be captured in the national policies. The Gacaca process cannot have been perfect. If anybody thought that would have been a perfect solution, they are wrong. So there are shortfalls in any system. And I can say, for example, one of the shortfalls is that it is possible, because of the limited capacity to analyze issues, that somebody could have gone wrong in terms of analyzing the legal issues, because it was simplified. The offenses were written down in a simplified version so the communities can understand it. But two, in a community where you have people that have lived together, it's possible to tell a lie. It's also possible to tell, to be influenced by internal sentiments about so and so. But if you take 100 cases and 2 of them have gone wrong and 98 have gone right, you take credit for the 98 and then you deal with the 2% separately. So you don't say, because ABCD has gone wrong, therefore the system is wrong. Because in the US, in Canada, in Europe, everywhere, you have had convictions where people have been convicted wrongly. It doesn't mean the American system is wrong. You have had people where innocent people have been convicted right, and center, or where criminals have been acquitted. When the fact is that they did this, but somehow because of the legal procedures on technicality, the fellow is released when he's a killer, a serial killer, a murderer or something. So the fact that somebody can be acquitted, although they are guilty, or they can be convicted, although they are innocent, is a phenomenon that happens in any legal system. It's just the degree, the magnitude of the problem that should worry anybody. And also, if there is no corrective mechanism, if there is no mechanism in place to correct the error once it is identified. So we believe that Gacaca was not perfect and would never be perfect. We believe that it made some errors and they can be corrected. That is why, even as it closes, there is a law that says once Gacaca has closed and there is manifestation of miscarriage of justice, then there is a system that will be able to review those kinds of decisions that are suspected to have occasioned miscarriage of justice. So there is a mechanism, an inbuilt mechanism that has been put in place. Again, I will say that some of the criticism by some of these organizations, I will repeat, have been very unfair, most unfortunate, some of them, because they are judged from a vantage point of, do it my way. But we can't do it your way, because your way is faulty. Your way is about, the criticism is about, you need lawyers. But we don't have the lawyers. I said we had to train people for 6 months to make them judges. A judge of appeal, after 6 months, all they had was high school, training in high school. Then you make them judges after 6 months, because we couldn't wait for 25 years to try. So they say, no, but these people are not qualified judges. You are not going to train judges for 25 years, waiting for the country to try them 25 years later. It can't work. That is the world of NGOs. That's the world of human rights organizations. That's not the real life of a nation. The real life of a nation is about justice, is about fairness, it's about transparency, it's about bread, it's about medical care, it's about education for children, it's about so many things. It's not about one small tiny trial in a court of law. And so we say, let's move, and history will judge us right or wrong. And at the end of the day, there is another power that will judge us even more harshly if we have done wrong. So there is also a God of heavens that at the end of the day, everybody will be held accountable. So I think people should do what they are supposed to do and let other people judge. And the judgment cannot always be on the home ground of human rights organizations, because their sphere of activity is much limited to a specific area rather than the big picture. And this criticism will go on forever. As long as human beings live, there will be somebody to say this is wrong, even when they can't provide what is better. And then there was the first question about the highest number of women in parliament. That's true, is that today I think Rwanda is still #1 country in terms of women representation in parliament. This was a conscious decision, and it became possible because even these Gacaca courts, there is no decision in any organ of the state. The women must have a minimum, under the Constitution, 30% representation, minimum. So once you have taken the 30%, they can add on whatever other percentages, but that's the minimum. So as a result, in many instances, if not only in parliament, I think in the ministry where I work, they constitute about 53, 54%. In many other government departments, they constitute large numbers of decision makers. Now this makes it easy. I don't know in your society, but in our societies usually, that's why it was shameful to find women participating in genocide. Women are supposed to be the mothers of all children. They're supposed to be the foundation of the family. And usually in our community, although even traditionally long ago before this modern Gacaca, they would not sit with men in the open on the Gacaca, in the grass. They would be in the background, but they would influence the decisions, always. The women were always the decision makers quietly, even when they didn't participate in the noise-making business. They would still be the power behind the decisions. So it is part of the cultural setup that women played a very, very important role in fairness, in sorting out problems between people. And because of their role in Gacaca, because of their role in other leadership positions now, even at the community level, they must always be 30% minimum. This has made the transformation in Rwanda much easier and much faster. It's not really to exaggerate, is that they are simpler to deal with in our community. They are more trusted in our community. they are not easy to manipulate in terms of so many things. So they are more dependent. People trust them more in our community. So I don't know in other communities. I'm just talking in Rwanda. So the women were always viewed as a source of stability, as a source of foundation for the family. And so when we put them in these places as administrative measures, the impact has been so significant that now they are topping in not only 30%, but 50 and 60 and more. And that, I think, will continue. So this has impacted positively on Gacaca and on other decision-making processes in the country. And I want to say that I think this is the last question that I have answered. If I have not answered something correctly or said it wrongly, I'm very sorry, but I hope I have tried my best. Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation, Matthew Mark. Congratulations on graduating this past weekend.
Thank you.
Thank all of you for coming out, and we will see you at the next one.